The decade of the 20s marked the tipping point for the electrification of America. In 1920, only 35% of homes were wired for electricity, and by 1930, it nearly doubled to 68%. By 1929, 70% of industrial plants were powered by electricity. One of the men responsible for that growth was Frederick Pfeiffer, an assistant to Commerce Secretary Herbert Hoover and vice president of the Society for Electrical Development. Prior to joining the Commerce Department, he worked for General Electric as a technical journalist and was editor of Electrical World magazine. In 1923, he proposed the idea of President Coolidge lighting a Christmas tree on the White House grounds to encourage the use of electric lights for Christmas trees. It seems Pfeiffer wasn't the only one with that idea. In late November, Lucretia Walker Hardy, acting director of the D.C. Community Center Department, sent a letter to President Coolidge asking that a community Christmas tree be lit on the White House lawn on Christmas Eve. There's no indication that Hardy and Pfeiffer were initially aware of the other's request, but once the idea was approved, both worked to make it happen. Hardy insisted the tree be on the White House grounds, but First Lady Grace Coolidge would not allow it. A Christmas Eve choir concert was already scheduled on the North Lawn, and she didn't want competing events at the White House. A compromise was reached, and the tree was allowed on the Ellipse, just south of the White House grounds. Now that the lighting was approved, all they needed was a tree. Pfeiffer, along with Vermont Senator Frank Green, reached out to Dr. Paul Moody, president of Vermont's Middlebury College, and arranged for the college to donate a tree from their forest preserve. Middlebury alumni paid for a 48-foot balsam fir to be cut and sent to D.C. by train. Once the tree was set in place, the Washington Electrical League began their work of running underground power cables and stringing the tree with 2,500 red, green, and white light bulbs. They topped off the tree with a 3-foot illuminated star. In total, the electrical equipment cost the League $5,000. At 5 p.m. on Christmas Eve, President Coolidge joined close to 4,000 spectators on the Ellipse, including Frederick Pfeiffer, Senator Green, and Lucretia Hardy, who happened to be celebrating her 51st birthday. In classic silent cow form, the president unceremoniously flipped the switch without saying a word. A 4-piece Marine Corps band provided music, and a local choir gave a short program of Christmas carols. The tree was lit from sunset to sunrise through New Year's. The first National Community Christmas tree almost became the last. Speaking to a forestry group in April of 1924, Coolidge said using cut trees for Christmas was a waste of forest resources and discouraged the practice. When Pfeiffer got word of this, he knew future tree lightings were in jeopardy. His wife Elizabeth offered the solution. In place of a cut tree, plant a living tree instead. Once Pfeiffer convinced the American Forestry Association to donate a living tree, the president agreed to continue the practice. Now, since the Ellipse was used for events throughout the year, planting a permanent tree in the middle was not an option. It was decided Sherman Square on the east side of the White House would be the tree's new home. A 35-foot Norway spruce from New York was planted on the square and became the second National Community Christmas tree. At 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, 1924, President and Mrs. Coolidge made their way to Sherman Square. The president was a bit more chatty at the second lighting. With the words, "I accept this tree, and I will now light it," he flipped the switch to light 1,500 multicolored light bulbs, and the annual tradition was born. The popularity of the tree grew rapidly in the 20s. Beginning in 1925, the lighting ceremony was broadcast on local radio, and by 1929, the ceremony was carried nationally on the NBC radio network. Since radio lacked a visual component, chimes were played when the president flipped the switch, signaling the lighting of the tree. When the tree was first lit in 1923, there were no Christmas lights on the market specifically designed for outdoor tree lighting. Large light bulbs, much like those used for home lighting, were strung together in custom-made strings. The heat generated by the bulbs and the weight of the wiring put a great deal of stress on the live tree in Sherman Square. In 1927, Noma introduced outdoor string sets equipped with GE C9 Mazda Christmas lamps, the first light bulbs designed and marketed for outdoor Christmas lighting. 500 of these new C9 lamps in Noma strings were purchased for the 1927 tree. The smaller bulbs and the lighter weight strings put less stress on the living tree, but the damage caused by the larger lights from previous years had already taken its toll. The tree was replaced in 1929 with a new Norway spruce, and for the first time, ornaments were added to give the tree a bit of sparkle during the day. As President Hoover began his term, radio was becoming a practical means of mass communication. Beginning in 1930, Hoover began the presidential tradition of using the lighting ceremony as the platform to give his annual Christmas address to the nation. 1932 saw a new feature added to the tree: music. Loudspeakers, hidden in the lower branches at the base of the tree, were wired to a Victrola in a nearby police hut. The officer on duty had the extra task of keeping the Christmas carols going from 8 to 10 each evening. The fall of 1933 saw Sherman Square undergo a radical redesign. By Christmas, the national tree was the only tree left in the park, and it was decided that tree needed to go as well. It was suggested to plant 2 trees and alternate their use to allow the trees time to recover from the stress of being decorated. Lafayette Park on the north side of the White House was considered the best spot. 2 Fraser firs from North Carolina were planted 20 feet from the center statue, one to the west and one to the east. Fraser firs thrive in the higher elevations of the North Carolina mountains, but not so well in Foggy Bottom. Additionally, the growing popularity of President Roosevelt caused the yearly attendance at the lighting ceremony to grow beyond the capacity of Lafayette Park. After 5 years, it was time for a new tree and a new plan. The 1939 tree found its way back to where it all began, the Ellipse. Still wanting to use a live tree, but not being allowed to plant a permanent one, a compromise was reached. A red cedar from Mount Vernon was temporarily transplanted in the center of the Ellipse. After Christmas, it was removed and replanted off-site. This process was repeated for the 1940 tree. In early 1941, President Roosevelt requested that the tree be moved inside the White House grounds so he could invite the public to his yard and make the lighting ceremony more homey. 2 Oriental spruces were transplanted from the White House tennis court area to inside the fence on the south lawn. Much like the Lafayette Park setup, the trees were planted 100 feet apart, one on the east side and one on the west side. Each would alternate years being lit as well. This was the first time the national Christmas tree was on the White House grounds, and its first lighting would prove to be historic.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
"17 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was in Washington to meet with the President and Congress to discuss the Allied war strategy. He joined President Roosevelt for the Christmas Eve lighting ceremony.
And now, for the 9th time, I light the living community Christmas tree of the nation's capital.
Thus the chimes rang out, and the tree springs into light further down from the south portico of the White House.
This would be the last national Christmas tree Roosevelt would light. During the war years, Mrs. Roosevelt insisted the ceremony continue despite wartime restrictions. The tree was decorated with ornaments donated by D.C. school children, but it wasn't lit. The ceremony was moved to the early afternoon on Christmas Eve, and the President used the occasion to deliver his annual Christmas message.
The Christmas spirit lives tonight in the bitter cold of the front lines in Europe and in the heat of the jungles and swamps of Burma and the Pacific Islands. The thoughts of these men tonight will turn to us here at home around our Christmas trees, just as our own thoughts go out to them tonight and every night in their distant places.
After a 3-year hiatus, President Truman lit his first national tree on Christmas Eve 1945 to a snow-covered lawn packed with spectators. With the austerity of wartime behind us, new lights and ornaments for the tree were provided by the Electric Institute of Washington. The post-war years saw the introduction of a new form of broadcast communications, television. The lighting ceremony was first televised in 1946 to the few early adopters with TV sets. That year also saw the creation of a television committee to coordinate the broadcast of the event. The following year, NBC and the Dumont Network televised President Truman giving his Christmas address and lighting the tree. By 1948, changes were made to the tree's lighting and decorations with a television audience in mind. One such change, a white light bulb, was added in every other socket so the lit tree would show up better on TV. The lighting of the tree was still held on Christmas Eve, but President Truman preferred to spend the holiday at his home in Independence, Missouri. Beginning in 1948, the president lit the tree remotely from his home in Missouri after he gave his Christmas address to the nation. The audience for the lighting progressively shrunk during the 4 years Truman was not in attendance, and organizers grew concerned that the custom of having the president light the tree was about to end. President Truman remained in Washington for his last lighting ceremony on Christmas Eve 1952. The growth of television was becoming more evident when it was estimated that millions of viewers watched the broadcast of the ceremony. Watching the tree come alive when the president threw the switch was no longer reserved for a handful of spectators braving the cold weather on the South Lawn. It could now be experienced from the comfort of your own home. When President Eisenhower took office in 1953, the Korean conflict was winding down and would come to an end in June of that year. Colonel Edward M. Kirby, an Army public relations officer in both World War II and Korea, left the Army in March of 1953 and entered the private sector as a public relations counsel for the Greater Washington, D.C. Board of Trade. Knowing firsthand the toll of war, Kirby proposed an event to encourage peace around the world through the spirit and meaning of Christmas. The 1954 Pageant of Peace would incorporate the lighting of the national Christmas tree, but expand the program into a 3-week-long Christmas-themed event and include the Washington Diplomatic Corps. The stage used for the ceremony would also host musical and choir concerts and other Christmas-related programs each night the tree was lit. For the first time since it began in 1923, the ceremony would not be held on Christmas Eve, but a week earlier on December 17th. The tree would remain lit past the New Year until January 6th. The White House grounds could not accommodate a program of this scope, so the event returned to where it all began 31 years earlier, the Ellipse. Since a tree still couldn't be permanently planted in the center of the Ellipse, it was decided to return to the original practice of using a cut tree. The spruces planted by President Roosevelt were abandoned as national Christmas trees. The West tree died in the 70s, but the East tree is still where it was planted 83 years ago. Although it's no longer festooned with strings of colorful lights, it is topped with a blinking red light, not to pay homage to its past role, but to fulfill its new role, guiding Marine One safely to its landing spot on the South Lawn. The first Pageant of Peace tree was a 67-foot balsam fir from Michigan. To light the tree, Kirby and his team hired a company that was no stranger to coordinating Washington, D.C. celebrations, Hargrove Displays.
Dad went into the Marine Corps and became best friends with a man named Bill Law. And when he came out of the service, he started a business called Hargrove Displays with my grandfather, another Earl Hargrove, and they decorated store windows at Christmas time. And that's kind of how it began.
Hargrove Displays' big break came when they were asked to create floats for Truman's 1949 inaugural parade.
Company's claim to fame has been doing the presidential inaugurations since Harry S. Truman back in '49, and ever since the Clinton administration, Hargrove served as a general contractor for the most part, doing those presidential inaugurations.
The first pageant of peace was a bold undertaking compared to previous tree lighting ceremonies, and it didn't come without its share of, shall we say, moments.
My father loved to tell this story, and he was quite the storyteller. He would tell me that it was the very first year that they had a live nativity scene. And of course, every morning, several mornings, he would go in and the baby Jesus would be gone, and he'd have to go down to the local department store, I think it was called Cans at that point in time, and buy a new doll. So they ended up bolting that down, took care of that, but you can't really bolt a sheep down. So the sheep got loose, and he was running around D.C. trying to catch this sheep. And so lo and behold, this police officer comes up and says, "Dude, what are you doing?" He said, the baby sheep got loose from the live nativity scene, and I'm trying to catch him, and he went down this road." He goes, "Oh, okay, tell you what, you go this way, and I'll circle around the other way, and we'll come together, and we'll corner him." Good idea. So down they went, and the dad had the baby sheep in his arms and says, "Okay, now what are we going to do?" Police officer had a motorcycle. He said, "Put him in the sidecar. I'll take him back." So he put him in the sidecar, zipped it up, and he went bah, all the way back. And that's the story my father told.
The first pageant of peace was such a huge success, the Washington Board of Trade decided to continue the event. In October of 1955, the Christmas Pageant of Peace Incorporated was formed as a nonprofit with Edward Carr as president. Edward Kelly of the National Park Service was added to the committee in November. The Christmas Pageant of Peace Committee served as the custodian of the national tree until 2006, when the National Park Foundation assumed the responsibility. The second year of the Pageant of Peace had its moments too. President Eisenhower lit the tree remotely from his home in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, much like President Truman did from Missouri. But then, something happened.
Dad was there on site, and it lights up, and he hears the oohs and ahs. And then all of a sudden he hears ooh, ah, and he looks up, and part of the Christmas tree has gone black. So he stuffs his back pocket full of tin foil, and of course at this point in time there's no scaffolding around the tree and no cherry pickers. So he literally told me that he got into the trunk of the tree and he climbed up the trunk and found the strand of lights that had the bad fuse, popped the fuse out, stuffed it with foil paper, got it all connected back, and all of a sudden you hear the oohs and ahs. Tree came back on.
Earl Hargrove took great pride in his work with the Pageant of Peace, and it was an event he looked forward to each year.
I remember as being a young girl, little girl, that right before Christmas, as soon as December hit, I remember Dad bundling up in all of his clothes because it was cold out, and he'd have to go down and decorate the national Christmas tree.
One of Earl's trees was immortalized on a postage stamp. The U.S. Postal Service began the practice of issuing a special Christmas stamp in 1962, and the second Christmas stamp, issued in 1963, featured the national tree. The stamp was an illustration of the 1962 tree drawn by artist Lily Spandorf at the lighting ceremony. It was issued to honor the Pageant of Peace and the 40 years of the national Christmas tree. Spandorf's work also graced the cover of the 1962 Pageant of Peace program. Also in 1962, it was the first time a major corporation took an active role in the Pageant of Peace.
GE Lighting was interested in donating lighting services, whether it meant design or products or whatnot, to nationally developed projects. National monuments of all kinds were on a list, and it was in the advertising group. And they were saying, where can we donate lighting to get GE's name in front and really do a good job of lighting and use our expertise as well as our products? And then, of course, the publicity that resulted. So it was a major program, like many companies do, to get their name and their products out there in front of people.
Although the use of GE light bulbs on the national Christmas tree goes back as far as the first tree in 1923, it wasn't until 1962 that General Electric became actively involved with the Pageant of Peace. That year, GE donated the lighting for the 57 state and territory trees. The following year, they took over the design and lighting of the main tree as well. GE was now responsible for the tree, But Hargrove continued to install the lighting and oversee the Pageant of Peace events.
Hargrove was responsible for building that, for setting it up, and making sure that everything ran smoothly. They had their hands in all of it, A to Z.
GE Lighting assigned the National Christmas Tree Project to Al Hart.
Dad's specialty was outdoor lighting. They all knew he was very artistic, and doing the National Christmas Tree just fell in his lap.
Al Hart was really Mr. Outdoor Lighting at that time.
Al Hart began his career with GE Lighting right out of college, first in Cincinnati, but he soon moved to the GE Lighting headquarters at Nela Park in Cleveland, where he would remain for the rest of his professional career.
When Dad first started at GE, he really got involved with the outdoor lighting. Then he specialized in signs. He did parking lots. He did lighting for highways. He did gas stations. I can still remember getting in the car. Come on, kids, we're going to go for a ride. And my sister and I were very excited. And then we went to a gas station out in the middle of nowhere so that Dad could get out of the car and look all around, and he would examine the gas station, and then he would look at the lights that they had and take notes and then climb back into the car. It was, that was my life.
Since the 20s, GE was the largest domestic manufacturer of Christmas light bulbs. They sold replacement bulbs directly to consumers and supplied bulbs to string set manufacturers, but in 1963, they introduced string sets for the first time. Al used over 3 miles of these new strings on his first national tree and the state trees, but instead of traditional C9 Christmas lamps, he drew on his expertise with sign lighting and used a sign lamp instead. When Al began designing the tree in the summer of 1963, he had no idea the significance of his first tree. A 30-day period of mourning following the death of President Kennedy put the Pageant of Peace on hold. On December 22nd, President Johnson brought the mourning period to a close with a candlelight vigil at the Lincoln Memorial.
30 days and a few hours ago, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 35th President of the United States, died a martyr's death. And on this eve of Christmas, in this time of grief and unity, of sadness and continuity, let there be for all people in need the light of an era of new hope and a time of new resolve. Let the light shine, and let this Christmas be our thanksgiving and our dedication.
Afterwards, the president walked over to the Ellipse to light the tree.
On this occasion 1 year ago, our beloved President John F. Kennedy reminded us that Christmas is the day when all of us dedicate our thoughts to others. And now here, as we have done so many years, we turn on in your capital city the lights of our national Christmas tree.
Al's first tree would become a shining symbol of hope for a grieving nation. Al took special pride in his tree toppers. Each year, he would create a unique topper to fit with the overall design of the tree.
He would set up the card table in the living room, and then he would just sort of camp out. That would be his place. And there would be drawing papers, pencils, scattered everywhere. He was not a neat person. And he would make all these different drafts, and he was drawing on them. And then the next thing we knew, there was a topper.
Downstairs from us was a machine shop and staff. And Al Hart took full advantage of it. He came up with ideas for tree toppers or special devices for the state trees, and he would have those made down in the machine shop.
So every once in a while, Dad would bring home the tree topper, and we could actually see what it looked like, and I was always amazed at how big they were. I do remember seeing this tree topper coming home. And one year, and I think it may have been when the Lukalax light went in for the first time. So you have to picture our house. It was a kind of windy. It was not open floor plan, let's put it that way. And he put the topper on the kitchen table and then turned it on. And that light went all the way upstairs. Every bedroom upstairs was lit. It was amazing. We were absolutely floored.
Earl Hargrove made sure Al's toppers got the attention they deserved.
But the one special year, they had bought this little red sports car. And he was very excited about that because he was going to dress up as Santa, and he was going to arrive in this little red sports car.
The National Christmas Tree at the White House, where Santa arrives by minicar to place the topmost star. Lack of snow forced the switch from sleigh to sports car. This 70-foot, 54-year-old Vermont tree is the main symbol of President Johnson's annual pageant of peace. Careful coming down, Santa.
Not every kid can say, hey, that's my father dressed as Santa Claus, and he's climbing at the top of the tree, and he rode in that little red car. People just didn't believe you. But as years went on, and my friends and the people who I was around got to see it year after year and started, really believing it, it was just pride, just really proud to be a part of it.
During Al's tenure, the tree was still a cut tree, and each year the size and shape would vary. He would present his design ideas to the Pageant of Peace Committee during the summer. They would select a color scheme, approve the topper design, and any other ornaments that might be used. The actual number of lights couldn't be determined until the tree was selected and cut in mid-November.
From about August until end of November, we didn't see my dad much at all. He was always in D.C. He was setting things up. They couldn't start until they had the tree. Is it going to be a skinny tree? Is it going to be a fat tree? Does it have... One had a big bump on the side. He called it his pregnant tree. And so that really, he couldn't do much ahead of time until he saw what the tree looked like.
Al worked closely with Earl Hargrove and his team during the installation process to make sure his vision became a reality. Despite the hectic pace of getting the tree perfect for its big night, Al would always take time to talk to a group of school children who happened to visit during the installation or a reporter who wanted to know what was new this year. Once the tree was done and tested, Al would hop on a plane and head home. He never attended a lighting ceremony or met any of the presidents whose yard he lit. Al preferred to watch the lighting like the rest of America, at home with his family.
That was very anxiety-filled time for all of us. And we had a little tiny black and white television, and Dad would gather us all around the television. We'd sit around on the floor peering at the television, and we'd just be saying, please light, please let it light, oh, please let it light. And then when he'd press it and it would light, we would cheer and hooray, congratulate Dad, and he would breathe a huge sigh of relief, and that was the end of the work for that year.
Al knew that the eyes of a nation were watching his work, and the reputation of General Electric was on the line. He was quoted as saying, "If it didn't fire up, there'd be hell to pay." Thanks to his meticulous planning and the expertise of Earl Hargrove's crew, Al never faced the wrath of GE management. Instead, letters of thanks and attaboys made their way to his desk well into January.
Al Hart was such a creative person. I mean, you know, when you think of many of those early national Christmas tree designs, they were works of art. Really, with the customized types of ornaments, I mean, they were truly magnificent.
One would imagine the man who designed the national tree with miles of string sets and thousands of lights would have his house all lit up for Christmas too.
So Christmas lighting at our house was really the family joke. Here's Dad doing all this incredible and wonderful lighting for the national Christmas tree. But he was burned out. He was exhausted. He didn't have the energy to go ahead and do huge lighting around the house. He decided, though, he would do Halloween. He would decorate for Halloween. So he got a weather balloon and inflated it, put a lamp of some sort in, I don't know what kind, but it kind of, with the coloring of the weather balloon, it turned it all orange. And then he found green crepe paper and he made big eyes, nose, big smiling, jagged tooth mouth. And as the neighborhood got used to it, then he brought home a speaker system. And he would sit in the window, kind of hidden behind, and he would see the little kids come up and he would say, "Hello there, Superman. How is your Halloween?" And the kids would either go, "It's the Great Pumpkin," or they would scream in terror and run away. But he had so much fun just doing that interaction.
Al's work in the sign lighting industry continued to grow during his tenure as the national Christmas tree designer. In the 60s, Las Vegas had over 1 million sockets in their signs, and GE wanted to fill them.
So he knew the sign industry very, very well. And he knew what kind of light bulbs they were after and what their problems were. And he worked a lot with that industry, and I was sort of tagging along at that time as his assistant. Las Vegas signs were kind of dominated by a couple of companies who did the bulb replacement. But Al figured out a special light bulb that would not burn out as fast. It would lower the maintenance costs of exposed lamp signs, as they were called then. And so when GE came out with that all changed. And all of a sudden, GE was in Las Vegas for some of these signs. But that was only one of several developments that Al Hart came up with in order to get the Las Vegas business, in order to get more of the sign business. But he was a genius at turning a problem into a solution with the technical support of the people at Nela Park who could invent any kind of light bulb you wanted.
One of the developments that came out of the Vegas project made it on to the national Christmas tree.
Al had this idea of using Lexan, which was newly invented at the time, as a coating for a sign lamp because, well, in Las Vegas also, what I forgot to say was, you get sandstorms. And so it's like sandpaper rubbing on those colored coatings on the outside of the bulbs. And so Lexan, which is a polycarbonate material, very tough, so that goes over the color coat of the bulb, and that becomes a Lexan sign lamp. And those colors were bright. You could see the filaments, so they were clear, transparent coating, and so they sparkled.
Before the new line of Lexan sign lamps hit the market in early 1966, Al put 6,000 blue and green Lexan-coated S11 lamps on the 1965 tree and 10,000 red ones on the state trees. It was the first commercial application of the new Lexan lamps, and they would be Al's go-to lamp for the national tree from that point on. Of all of Al's lighting projects, the national Christmas tree gained the most press attention for him, and sometimes for his family as well.
So Dad was always engaged in PR for the tree. We knew that there were clippings, newspaper articles that would come out every year. And so things kind of got a little disconnected between our family traditions and the traditions around the national Christmas tree. So in our family, we put the Christmas tree up Christmas Eve, and it came down New Year's Day. That was in stone. And because my father was an incredible procrastinator, the Christmas tree wasn't bought until about 2 or 3 days prior to Christmas, until he needed Christmas Eve, until he needed to put it up. So one day I was in school and got a message from the office, which is threatening in itself, and it was to come home from school immediately. I immediately assumed the worst. Something is going on, somebody's sick, whatever. And halfway home, my sister, who was in another school, we met and we continued walking home together, both frantically going over all of these imagined scenarios that could call both of us home from school immediately. And we walked into the house, and there was a Christmas tree standing in the corner. And there were reporters and cameras, and Mother is all dolled up. She's got her hair in a French bun, which she never wore. And it was crazy what was going on. And it was publicity for the paper. And they wanted shots of the national Christmas tree designer putting up his own tree. And how does that work? So it was all very staged for the publicity shots. It was kind of fun. And then we were all in the paper. You could see the backs of our heads. And that was our 15 minutes of fame, at least for my sister and myself and my mom. Oh, and afterwards, well, that tree was too early. It had to get dragged out again.
Al's National Christmas Tree press coverage wasn't limited to the local Cleveland newspapers.
So Dad had a lot of PR opportunities as he was doing the designing during those 10 years. And one of them was being on the Today Show.
On the morning of December 16, 1970, Al made his national TV debut on NBC's Today Show. The set was complete with a mock-up of that year's tree, including a scale model of the topper. Al showed the lighting used for that year's tree and shared with viewers Christmas lighting tips they could use at home.
Sadly, I wasn't around, so I was out of the country and I didn't have access to be able to see it. But I do recall that they gave the interviewing with Dad to Joe Garagiola. And he was a little disappointed that he was being interviewed by the sports person instead of the news people.
Despite all the great press, the 1970 tree proved to be a challenge. The train hauling the 78-foot spruce from South Dakota derailed twice in Nebraska on its way to Washington. Once there, it was toppled by a windstorm the weekend before the lighting ceremony, and extra branches had to be added. For the first time, a fireproof coating was added to the light sockets. After a couple of days, this coating caused the bulbs to explode on the bottom half of the tree. This first tree of the 70s would foreshadow a precarious decade for the national Christmas tree. The 1972 tree was the last one Al designed. It was also the last time a cut tree was used. Letters from individuals and environmental groups requested that conservation concerns be addressed and that the use of cut trees cease. This concern seemed to be focused only on the national tree at the White House and not on the U.S. Capitol Christmas tree at the other end of the National Mall. Congress still uses cut trees from our national forests for their annual tree at the Capitol. In the fall of 1973, the National Arborist Association donated a 42-foot Colorado blue spruce from Pennsylvania. It was planted on the northeast edge of the Ellipse in Presidential Park. This has remained the site of the national Christmas tree ever since. The designer for the 1973 tree was GE Applications engineer John Suter.
John Suter was chosen for the Christmas tree work because it was kind of one of those things you rotated through. Al was the manager. He was going to be checking you and helping you out, but John had the responsibility of making it happen. So he would work with the Pageant of Peace people, and he would decide, well, were there going to be trees, state trees, how would they be positioned, how would they be lighted, how would they put it all together, and he and Al would figure out something. But John would be the go-to person to make it all happen.
The nation was thrown a curveball in October of 1973. The Arab oil embargo caused crude oil prices to triple, resulting in an energy crisis. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, President Nixon went on national television to lay out his plan to conserve energy. One element affected Christmas lighting.
Good evening. 3 weeks ago, I spoke to you about the national energy crisis and our policy for meeting it. Tonight, I want to talk with you again to report on our progress and to announce further steps we must take to carry out our energy policy. The fifth step involves cutting back on outdoor lighting. As soon as the emergency energy legislation passes the Congress, I shall order the curtailment of ornamental outdoor lighting for homes and the elimination of all commercial lighting except that which identifies places of business. In the meantime, we are already planning right here at the White House to curtail such lighting that we would normally have at Christmas time. And I am asking that all of you act now on a voluntary basis to reduce or eliminate unnecessary lighting in your homes.
Dad was very upset about it. He could quote you exactly how much energy each of those light bulbs wasted. And it's like, this is costing me 2 cents worth of electricity. This is not worth it when you look at the happiness that it brings to the people. He felt it was perhaps not the smartest idea. There were other ways that were far better to conserve energy than Christmas tree lights. So it's not good.
The tradition of a national Christmas tree was started to encourage an increase in the use of electricity. But 50 years later, it was darkened due to an energy crisis.
And all of a sudden the crisis hit, and so the whole lighting was left off. It was never illuminated except for the tree topper. The Pageant of Peace group also negotiated with the government so that they knew what they could do and what they couldn't do. So it was a complicated time, but the topper was on and the tree was off. And unfortunately, that made for a pretty dark display, but there was at least one piece left.
The following Christmas, we had a new president and a more energy-conscious design for the tree. The tree was once again fully lit. For the 1976 tree, a new GE applications engineer assumed the design duties, Frank Leguyza. Like Al Hart before him, Frank was an artist engineer.
Frank Leguyza was everybody's dream of a lighting designer. He was assigned to be the store lighting person, but he came to us from New York, and there he had worked with one of the first of what we now call a lighting designer folks, and his name was Cy Shemitz. But Frank had gotten a lot of lighting experience working for Cy. And so he came just loaded with ideas. And so he was a perfect one to try some of those ideas on the national tree and the Nela Christmas lighting. He did very spectacular lighting, had a very good sense of design. He understood the light sources very well. He liked to do mock-ups beforehand so he could do it just right when we got to the full scale. And he was so good with people, he could explain all of this, and he would just, kind of put his arms around you verbally, and all of a sudden you were really smart about lighting, and Frank was a source of information as well as good design ideas.
Frank Leguyza was another very creative person. When I first joined the Lighting Institute team, the fellows that were already on staff, and Nancy Christensen, who was also one of the group, they were just such great mentors. And Frank at the time, his main presentations at the Lighting Institute had to do with incandescent and halogen lamps, and also retail lighting, museum lighting. So I got to learn from him. And Frank Leguyza was just the greatest storyteller. It was hard to keep him on script, but people were just fascinated by listening to his stories.
Frank Legaisa was bigger than life. He was a wonderful person. He was just such a talented man.
As soon as I tell somebody what I do, they're always talking about Frank Legaisa. So I am so fortunate to follow in his footsteps. I wish I had met him because I'd be able to see his files and drawings and his engineering and his brains. And it's just, I've heard he was an amazing man.
So my dad was born in Jamaica, Queens, New York. His father was first generation from Sicily, and his mom, Rose, came over on a boat from Sicily with her two sisters as a teenager. The legend in our family is that their last name, Legaisa, which is L-A-G-I-U-S-A, which everyone mispronounced forever, was actually changed when his grandfathers came from Italy to end in the USA. So the spelling probably would have been Leguisa, U-I-S-A, but he changed it so it would be a G-I in the USA. And so that patriotism, that strong sense of wanting to be part of this country and everything that meant. His brother was in the Navy. He was in the Navy. His father was in the Navy. And at one point during the end of World War II, the three of them were enlisted at the same time. And I always think about that when I think about him as the designer of the National Christmas Tree and how that immigrant story, kind of came full circle.
The National Christmas Tree wasn't Frank's first venture into Christmas lighting. He began designing the Nela Park Christmas display when he started with GE Lighting in 1967.
It was the first display that my dad designed when we moved from the East Coast to Cleveland to Nela Park, and it was Lollipop Park. And they were just such huge, magical looking lollipops of different designs and colors and configurations. And as a little kid, I remember going, and I don't remember saying this, but my dad I said to him, wow, Dad, can we lick one? Can we try one? They look so real to me as a kid, that he was really thrilled that he captured that and could draw kids in that way.
When Al Hart began designing the National Christmas Tree, he made the topper a key element of the tree. Frank took it a step further by adding lighted ornaments and introducing the technique of color cycling.
I remember there was a tree that may have gone from magenta, it went from magenta or white to red to white to blue, and then it mixed. And that cycling of the separate colors was really cutting edge, and nobody had ever seen that before. And he was really excited about that, and I thought that was really cool. Today it seems like, well, no big deal. My tree does that here, but it was not anything that anybody had seen before.
Frank's design process was similar to Al's.
The National Christmas Tree would just loom large for him from, I want to say January 1st of the year prior all the way through to the end of the year. And there would be string lights and designs and foam in our dining room. Our dining room was pretty much not usable until after the tree was lit, because the dining room was where my dad would be up late with models and making, prototypes with plastic, and my mom and I would have to help hold things so he could glue them, or, so it was a huge deal.
Since the tree was now a living tree, its dimensions only gradually changed year to year. Frank took advantage of this and each year built scale models of the tree with his design. It allowed him to precisely calculate the number of lights and the feet of garland he would need early in the design process. This also allowed Frank's design to have a geometric symmetry. To help achieve this, he used a visual trick with his lighted ornaments. He would make his ornaments in 3 sizes. The bottom of the tree would get the largest ornaments, the mid-sized ones in the middle, and the smaller ones at the top.
That sense of line and form was really important to him. So I remember sometimes he would get criticism for some of the displays because they didn't fit, the traditional image people would have of what a tree would look like. But he was always very open. He would always want to hear feedback and incorporate that and learn and try to listen to people and what they thought about the tree. It meant a lot to him. So his process of creating and designing was storyboarding. So he would do a lot of just rough sketches. He was trained as a draftsman, so he had draftsman training, and as an engineer. And he was also very artistic. So his sketches were beautiful. Watching him sort of bring a design through that process was really fascinating to me.
Unlike Al, Frank preferred to bundle up and watch the lighting ceremony up close and personal instead of at home in front of a TV.
When my grandmother was still alive, my dad's mom, she did come with us at least one time to see the tree, and that was a really big deal for her. But my mom and I got to go most years and attend the Pageant of Peace ceremony and, be a few rows in front of the president as they threw the switch.
The use of a living tree got off to a rocky start. The tree, planted in 1973, served for 4 years and had to be replaced before the 1977 lighting. The 77 tree was destroyed in a windstorm and had many on the Pageant of Peace Committee wondering if they should return to the practice of using a cut tree. A 30-foot Colorado blue spruce from York, Pennsylvania was planted in time for the 1978 lighting, and that tree lasted 32 years. For the 1979 tree, Frank chose the theme Light and Joy to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the incandescent light bulb. He chose the colors of blue and white and incorporated a brand new GE Christmas light set build, the Super Set. 5 weeks before the lighting, Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding 52 American citizens hostage. This crisis would occupy the psyche of the American public for over 2 years. In an interview leading up to the lighting, Frank recounted to a reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer a recurring dream. He's at the National Christmas Tree lighting with all the eyes of the world on the tree. The president flips the switch. The tree doesn't light, and all eyes look to Frank. He wakes up in a cold sweat. Would this dream prove to be prophetic?
There's a real tension in the park. And I remember my mom always had her pocketbook, she had her big purse. And I remember them going through it. And I remember my dad with his he had this big, thick, furry hat that he was always known for, just said, okay, just wait. He would just kind of had these big hands and he'd sort of hold my mom in my hands.
I'm going to ask Amy to throw the switch.
And then when it didn't light, I could almost feel my dad squeezing our hands. And there was that gasp feeling like, oh my God, what just happened?
I want to tell you what just happened. Around the periphery of this crowd, there are 50 small Christmas trees, one for each American hostage. And on the top of the great Christmas tree is a star of hope. We will turn on the other lights on the tree when the American hostages come home.
Frank and Earl Hargrove were told of the president's decision the morning of the ceremony because they were the only two who knew how to rewire the tree so only the topper would light. They were both sworn to secrecy.
My dad had to be notified, so it wasn't that they wanted to tell my dad, but because they had to figure out a way for the lighting topper to light but not the rest of the tree, they had to consult my dad. And as a result, they had to let him know that. So he then had to keep that secret for myself and my mom. And then he couldn't wait to tell us because my dad loved to talk. And it was killing him not to say what was happening. And they probably told him so he wouldn't have a heart attack. I think he could have had a heart attack if he didn't see it light. That was a big moment.
Frank took it all in stride. He said, "My personal pleasure and pride is secondary to the well-being of my fellow Americans who are hostages."
He was particularly proud of that tree, And I think it was really hard for him to keep it to himself because he wasn't very good at keeping secrets. Whether it was like a gift that he was buying for one of us in our family. So I think that was really hard for him. And then to see that it didn't come to fruition because he would think about theme and what was going on in the world. And all of that would kind of contribute to his design process. He was a very holistic designer. I think he really looked at all the layers of what was happening when he would come up with his design. So
the following year,
our American hostages have not yet come home, but most of our prayers have been answered. They have stayed in touch with their families. So far as we know, they are safe and their lives have been spared. Last weekend, the families of the American hostages met here in Washington to have a briefing by the State Department officials, including the Secretary of State. The hostage families asked me to do this year the same thing we did last year, and that is just to light the Star of Hope and to hold the other lights unlit until the hostages come home.
I think maybe that was, again, another one of those moments where I recognize the political significance of the role of that national tree in our collective history, in our collective experience of reflecting what was going on politically, reflecting what was going on in our world, and really, I don't want to say propaganda, but it was really using that tree to make a very strong statement. And that was very interesting.
Just after New Year's, Hargrove removed the lights and decorations, but unlike most years, the company was in full inauguration mode. As Reagan was sworn in 3 weeks later, the hostages were released. The transition team got wind of this a few days before, and Hargrove had an extra task added to their inaugural preparations.
Turning around the tree in that short of amount of time is an incredible feat, but not for Hargrove, and not under the leadership of Mr. Hargrove. He was a patriot, he was a veteran, a Marine, and when the president asks for something so substantial, so significant to happen, he answered the call. He always answered the call.
As promised by President Carter, the hostages arrived in Washington to a lit national Christmas tree. Since the living tree was less than 40 feet tall, the top could be reached using a cherry picker-style lift. This allowed for the topper to be put in place each year by a special guest. Amy Carter topped the tree in '78, and beginning in 1979, Joan Mondale began the tradition of the second lady topping the tree. That tradition was paused in 1980 when Penny Langdon, the wife of the highest-ranking hostage held in Iran, topped the tree. Barbara Bush continued the tradition in 1981.
My dad just had this very warm relationship with Barbara Bush. He really loved her, and it was reciprocal. They would give hugs and tell funny stories, and it was just very warm, and he just really looked forward to being with her. So I do have a couple pictures of them together in the cherry picker, and that was always really fun to hear about.
Frankly, guys made friends easily, and so if the president or the president's wife happened to come out and say, well, what's that on top, or what does this look like, or why did you choose blue, Frank would have an answer, and he would do it in a charming way, and he made friends, and making friends with Barbara Bush wasn't too hard. So Frank enjoyed every minute of the pageant of peace and helping and making sure it went just right.
In 1987, the Cold War was thawing and relations between the U.S. and Russia were warming up.
I hope the General Secretary is watching this on TV. I'd like him to see what we're celebrating, because for us, Christmas celebrates the cause of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. I cannot think of a better spirit in which to begin the meetings of the next several days. As a small reminder of that spirit, the Star of Peace atop the national Christmas tree will be lit day and night during the time our Soviet guests are here. And as we look out from the White House during our discussions, let the star remind us why we've gathered and what we seek.
The morning after the lighting ceremony, Mikhail Gorbachev arrived at the White House for a state visit and to sign the long-negotiated INF Treaty. The pageant of peace would serve as the backdrop to the signing of one of the most significant nuclear arms treaties.
It was over 6 years ago, November 18, 1981, that I first proposed what would come to be called the zero option. It was a simple proposal, one might say disarmingly simple.
The star on the tree remained lit for the duration of Gorbachev's visit. For President Bush's first national tree in 1989, Frank used the president's popular phrase, 1,000 points of light, as inspiration. As President Bush's term came to an end, so did Frank's tenure as the designer of the National Christmas Tree. With 17 trees and 26 Nela Park Christmas displays under his belt, Frank retired in 1993.
So after the ceremony was when my dad could really relax. That's when we'd go out and have a really great meal somewhere in Washington, D.C., and he would take my mom and I, and the crowds would still be there walking around the pageant of peace. There was a tree for every state. And my dad would be able to kind of relax and tell us any really fun story that he had, been experiencing around the lighting or great comments he heard. We would give him some feedback too. My mom and I were never shy at criticizing him or telling him how amazing it was. So that was really a special time.
When it came to decorating his own house for Christmas, Frank referred to it as his yearly dilemma. He would say, "My neighbors know what I do, so if I put no decorations outside my house at Christmas, I worry they'll think I'm a hypocrite. And if I'm too flashy, I worry they'll think I'm showing off."
He did have some big displays made, very simple displays. I remember one year he had this 5 or 6 foot wreath that would hang in the middle of our front of our house. Or something that would go on display on the front lawn, but it wasn't always that way. Sometimes my mom and I would be the ones that would string the lights around the front door if my dad was really busy.
When it came to Halloween, though, it sounds like Frank had a few conversations with Al Hart.
So, during Halloween in our neighborhood when I was growing up, we had a little tiny ranch house in a neighborhood full of kids. I remember him designing. No one else had one of these at the time because it was the 70s, a 4 by maybe 5 or 6 foot 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional jack-o'-lantern that had lights hidden inside and an outdoor speaker system back when nobody had that, so that he could play scary music, and black lights, which again weren't super common. We got them in our house, and he had a white lab coat that he borrowed from the guys in the lab at Nela Park, and put on a crazy wig and would have dry ice in the candy bowl, and the kids would come to the door, and my house was like the one that everybody wanted to go to on the street.
After Frank's retirement, the design of the National Christmas Tree and the Nela Park display was assigned to Renee Green. At 16, Renee knew she wanted to be a lighting designer, and much like Frank, Renee came to GE from a lighting design firm.
Renee Green was a specification area manager for General Electric, and she worked out of Chicago. And she had a pretty big territory to cover, but after Frank Lagaiza retired, they needed a designer, and Renee had a design background. And so for several years, she took over the role of designing Nela Park, holiday lighting, and the National Christmas Tree.
When Renee walked into her first Pageant of Peace Committee meeting, she was 27 in a room full of men nearly 30 years her senior. One of the committee members commented, "GE must have a lot of confidence in you to assign you such an important project." She said, "They do." Renee's tenure marked a shift in the design approach of the National Christmas Tree. Al Hart and Frank Lagaiza approached the tree as lighting engineers who understood design. Renee's approach was that of a designer who understood lighting. This difference is most noticeable in the ornate detail of the ornaments she designed and the geometric precision of her trees. Renee was not, as she puts it, a back-of-the-napkin type of designer. Her approach was more precise. Renee's design drawings and site plans were more like blueprints and less like artist concepts.
And Renee Green, I think she ended up in Chicago, had a lot of style and skill and understood lighting. And I still keep in contact with her once in a while. I will see her at a trade show or something.
Renee was also responsible for the Nela Park Christmas display, and being based in Chicago instead of Cleveland required local help. Kathy Persciano was assigned to help her out at Nela Park.
And so when I started to work in 1994, my job was to assist her in executing the design of the Nela Park holiday lighting display.
Jack Welch introduced to GE the concept of a boundaryless organization, where an employee's assignments were not limited to their geographical region. Renee was required to maintain her regular duties in Chicago, as well as design the Nela Park display in Cleveland and the National Tree in D.C. The boundaryless concept began to take its toll, and in early 1995, Renee left GE for a company in the lighting industry with more traditional boundaries. The Nela Park display and the National Christmas Tree were assigned to Kathy Persciano.
It was designing the National Tree, and all of the holiday lighting for General Electric was part of my job description. And I can remember when Terry McGowan interviewed me, and he said, "Of course you'll be doing all of the holiday lighting," and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Prior to working for General Electric, I did no commercial Christmas lighting. I was a commercial interior designer by training.
Kathy was a person who really, I'm a physicist, so you think of what my set of talents or skills are, and then you start talking to a designer and you realize this whole other world out there and how they can see and feel textures, and just get absolutely just a top-notch designer, great eye. She just understood design and the importance of color. If you can't match contrast, so there'd be things that stick in my mind that she tried to teach me, the geeky scientist, about how lighting can be better when you bring in all these other elements. So she, again, very talented designer, very detail oriented, and it had to be perfect. She wouldn't accept second best when it came to how something should look or how it all fit together. And the National Tree was a perfect example of that.
The person who really gave me advice was John Betchkel. And John was an employee of GE. He was in the marketing department, but he was also the chairman of the Pageant of Peace. And so he took me into his office one day and he said, "This is a pretty big job. I want you to be prepared when you go into that board meeting and present this design." And he schooled me on what to do and what to say, and I put a presentation together, and when I went to present my first design, I was totally prepared, and he was very proud of me. But he really gave me the advice about what the National Tree was, the history, who the Pageant of Peace, the organization, what they were all about. So I give him a lot of credit for helping me because he really kind of eased that transition for me.
Frank Lagaiza also gave Kathy some good advice.
Frank gave me a lot of pointers. I think the most important ones were to be really organized and to be very flexible, especially with the National Tree, because he knew politically how things changed and how things worked in Washington, and he said, just be flexible.
Al Hart was a source of encouragement as well.
Al Hart had retired many years before I worked at GE, but I did know him. He kept meticulous records in the archives. They're just unbelievably technical, detailed drawings, and he kept records of everything he ordered, and it put me to shame. I mean, I always thought I kept good records, not like Al. He was a great guy. And my only story about Al is one time after designing Nela Park, he came up to me one time and he went, and that was all he had to say.
Even with all the great advice and guidance, that first year was still a bit nerve-wracking.
The first year was, everything had been ordered in March, all the holiday lights, and, they were coming from offshore, and there was a longshoremen's strike in California, and all of the cases, and there were cases of holiday lights, were sitting on a boat, bobbing up and down off of the coast of California, and I could not get them delivered. That was a stressful year.
The ships eventually came in, and the lighting was delivered in time for Hargrove to install Kathy's first tree. The tree was all ready for the big night.
Okay, so the first turn on, we'll call it, of the National Christmas Tree that I participated in was Sure Fear, because that tree had to light. But what I didn't realize was that not only was there a button that the president pushed, but there was somebody in the back who had a lever who could manually turn that tree on, and it was turning on one way or another. And we did do rehearsals a couple nights before to make sure everything was working correctly.
Her first national tree was a success. But Kathy didn't have much time to bask in the glow before it was time to get to work on next year's design.
It was a rigorous process. So we would turn the tree on in Washington in December, and immediately that following January, I would start designing for the next year. And so I had about a month or so to put a design together, and then I presented it to the Pageant of Peace in February, early March, and then in March, all of the materials had to be ordered, all of the holiday lighting, all of the special materials that were used to fabricate the ornaments. So it was, really the project was year-round. And then in the summer, things would start to get fabricated, and then, later, early fall, the Park Service in Hargrove, who had been installing the tree forever, I would ship things to them, and then we would start organizing how the installation would actually take place.
With a project as large as the National Christmas Tree, inspiration can come from the smallest of things.
It's challenging each year to come up with a new design for an ornament and a topper. And I was talking with my mom one time, and we were just talking about different things, and she showed me this rhinestone brooch that she had, and I fell in love with it. And so that year, I had to stylize it a little bit, but I designed the topper around that piece of jewelry that my mom has, and that was my favorite topper.
During Frank's tenure, Neela Park began adding a replica National Christmas Tree to their holiday display. GE corporate headquarters in Fairfield, Connecticut also displayed a replica tree, but this one served another purpose as well.
I would go to Connecticut right around Thanksgiving, and we would test it there. And we would always be really careful that it was on a time and date when not a lot of people saw it, because we didn't want to, really expose too much. But yes, we did test it in Connecticut. But we also tested it in D.C. too.
For the 2001 tree, Kathy designed a gold and green tree. By September, the topper and ornaments were done, and the lights had arrived.
Hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
After 9/11, it was challenging, but I can honestly say it was not stressful. It was challenging because everything had been ordered. All of the lights had been ordered, all of the materials, the design had been accepted. It was gold and green that year, and everything was just, coming along nicely. And then 9/11 happened, and we got together and we talked about it, and the administration at the time said, it would be nice if it could have more of a patriotic theme. I had no red, white, and blue ordered, and I just contacted everyone, and we pulled it off. It was the best team of people I ever worked with that year. Nobody complained. Nobody gave me any problems. Everybody said, okay, let's make this happen. So everyone from, ordering the lights to ordering the materials to fabricating things, everybody just stopped what they were doing, we changed everything, and it was really a beautiful tree, and everybody was really happy with the results of it. But that was challenging, but not stressful, amazingly.
2001 was also the first national tree installation for Chris Wellens of Hargrove.
The world and the country was in a very chaotic mood at that point in time. So for them to be able to still have the focus to do the Christmas tree and all was very important. And they went to a patriotic theme. We had red, white, and blue. We had white stars and a red and blue background of lights on the tree. So, it was very important that year to, bring in, some happiness and show that, we still have the Christmas spirit and to go ahead and continue that tradition.
The normal 9-month process of designing and outfitting the national tree was now a 9-week process. This required some innovation and allowed for a new product to be used.
That was the first year that we were actually able to use net lights on the tree, and that really gave us a lot of flexibility for being able to cover the tree all the way around, not just have hot spots where limbs are and then dead spots where there's no limbs. We were able to really coat the tree with the net lights, connect all the net lights, and use that as a base layer. And then also what we're able to do is to attach our other second layer of lights onto those net lights at any given point in the tree, not just where the branches provided us a spot. So it gave us an ability to really give a nice even look to the tree. And we stuck with that design up until about 2 years ago.
Gaining access to the world's most secure compound in a post-9/11 world has proven to be a challenge for the Hargrove install team.
We had to have our names on the security access list. We had to have our vehicles on the access list. Our names and the person that's driving that vehicle and the vehicle tags all have to match. So if we had somebody who took a different van that day, they wouldn't be able to get in. So really the access was the hardest part. Once we were in there, it's kind of the same thing. One of the other challenges that we have when dealing with the tree is any security protocols that were to be breached at the White House would shut us down instantly. When the president's helicopter comes in, Marine One, we have to shut down the operation and leave site. And we're given very little notice of that. So we have to build those delays into our schedule to be able to, achieve our goals.
2005 was the last year the Christmas Pageant of Peace organization was involved with the National Christmas Tree. The National Park Service and National Park Foundation assumed responsibility for the tree going forward. In 2007, the Christmas Pageant of Peace event was renamed the National Christmas Tree and Pathway of Peace.
I think that it was just the National Park Service played such a big role in that because they were custodians of the Ellipse. And we worked very closely with the Park Service. And there was just, a thought process change that they needed to be more involved. So it did change. Many of the people on the Park Service over time had been part of the Pageant of Peace board, so that was not unusual for them to be a part of the design process. But things changed as far as how things were executed. And everything from how the site was managed to signage, down to the entertainment. The Park Service became more involved with it. They became more inclusive as far as diversity of entertainers and things like that. But I wouldn't say they really stifled my creativity. It was a good team.
The turn of the 21st century saw new protocols for energy use.
At that particular period of time, energy efficiency was really, being pushed by everyone in the United States, not only the lighting manufacturers, but also the government. And so we tried to make it as energy efficient as we could. It became more energy efficient over the years with the use of LED lights, but that was just the beginning of the whole, and let's make everything energy efficient.
New LED lighting technology was first used on the 2007 tree. The topper was lit using GE's Tetra Power white LEDs and industrial sign-grade LED. Other elements of the tree utilized LED lighting, but it wasn't a complete transition from traditional incandescent lights.
That took several years because in the beginning, there were a lot of LED products, but we had to be very careful about some of the characteristics of LED lightings. The color rendering index on a few of them in the beginning was not as high as it actually ended up being over the years. So it was just a gradual transition.
I think about one of the early LED designs. So now we have like an LED topper, and LED string lights, and LED ornaments. Well, when they flip the switch for the lighting of the national tree, they want everything to come on at once. Well, when you have all of these different electronic combinations, it didn't quite work that way. There was a delay, like when you turned, the strings came on, the ornaments came on, and then the topper was last. And they go, oh, we can't have that. It's like, well, we can't make anything faster than the slowest one. I mean, at this stage of the game, I can't make them all come on at once. That just is not going to happen. So that was one of the interesting, so we just make it part of the script. Having the topper come on last could give it that extra dramatic pop at the end, right?
Kathy reflects on her time as the National Christmas Tree designer.
I loved the Pageant of Peace. The people that were on that board were incredible individuals. You know, one of the big perks of being involved with the Pageant of Peace was I would get to go to the White House reception the night of the turn-on, and that was always memorable. And they were very gracious. They would always let me invite one other person. And just spending time in the White House, you know, you could just tour the White House, the main floor, and you could sit on the furniture. You can take as many pictures as you wanted to, and you could meet really interesting people. And the Pageant of Peace entertainment, that was always a thrill. So I got to meet Tony Bennett and Renee Fleming, Mannheim Steamroller, Manhattan Transfer, Jose Feliciano. I was interviewed by Al Roker and Willard Scott.
Oh, Christmas tree, the lights and balls are from GE.
I met some really special people, and so those are really fond memories.
After 14 national Christmas trees, Kathy passed the baton to Debbie George.
I started back in '98. I was their visual merchandiser. My background is window display. And actually, it's a funny story. My husband was getting his hair cut at the husband of one of the employees here. She happened to have called her husband that day and said, oh my gosh, we lost our display person. Are any of your clients display people? My husband was sitting in the chair. He said, hey, is Debbie still doing that display stuff? And that's how I got myself in the door here. But I knew nothing about Christmas lighting. I didn't know a C7 from a C9.
I had met Debbie George when she was involved with merchandise displays. And of course, at the Lighting Institute, we had a merchandising center. I mean, a place where we taught about retail lighting. And we'd have to refresh those displays. And so she worked for another woman for part of her career to help put these displays together. Well, you know, then down the road, you know, as jobs evolve and job responsibilities evolve, there was a need to have assistance with the holiday lighting. And it's Debbie George who someone said, you remember Debbie George? And I go, yeah, sure, I remember Debbie George. We really needed her for a holiday lighting role. And what a great addition to the team.
Well, Debbie didn't really need any advice because she had been working with me for a long time, and we were on the same page. We always understood each other. And so she knew the ropes. I mean, she knew how I ordered lights, and I, showed her all my records, and she was, part of installing Neela Park and really even the National Tree. She would help me with things.
So I would work hand in hand with her, ordering the lights, coming up with themes, drawing it out. And then she was actually the designer for the National Tree, but I was learning how the ornaments were made. I helped her order the lights. I learned a little bit about the math involved. She told me that whenever I'm on camera, which would not be today because it's 90 degrees, always have a pretty scarf on. She also taught me a couple other things. So she taught me about layers of light. That when you're designing the National Tree, it's nice to have different style lights on the tree, different size lights, so that there's depth on the tree.
Debbie's first tree, the 2009 tree, was also the first tree with all LED lighting.
Definitely LED lighting was my era. We tested it for a couple years when I was working hand in hand with Kathy. There was a couple multicolored lights we found out were you had all those colors, but you were only seeing blue. And in fact, I have a funny story that there was one year that One regime asked if we can get rid of some of the blue on the tree, and I had to go and try to spray paint some of the blue lights green so that they faded into the tree. Didn't really work because the glow of the lights would come through the paint.
Although Debbie began working with Kathy in 2003, 2009 was the first time she attended a lighting ceremony.
I had learned about it from Kathy, but I had never been there. And when you're sitting there and you're watching the tree and just knowing that you were in a warehouse or your basement coming up with this idea, and then to be able to see families taking their family photos and their holiday shots in front of this, I still get chills.
Debbie's design timeline is not too different from Kathy's.
You have a little bit of a break around Christmas time in January. I start designing, putting my head together about designs. Was it a monumental year? Was it an anniversary? Is there a color scheme we haven't used in a while? Was there a new product that GE Holiday Lighting has come out with? I will look back through, we have all the archives that GE has been designing since 1963. I will look back some of the pictures that we've done, some of the trees that were done earlier from the 1920s, and say, how can we recreate this, but use LED, use products that you can buy off the shelf at a Lowe's store.
You know, when I think about Debbie George and her role with the national tree, and don't forget, you have lighting technology, which is also changing. So, you know, LEDs are coming on board, looking for opportunities to streamline the whole process for the design of the national tree. So probably one of the biggest changes was really trying to use off-the-shelf ornaments for the national tree. And Debbie was able to look at stars and spheres and different colors and shapes of readily available products that could create really some stunning national tree designs. So really a whole different spin to how we designed lighting for the national tree.
In my era, lots of times we're using items that a regular homeowner can go to the store and buy and recreate the national tree, which is kind of nice versus the years past when they would never be able to fabricate some of the things that we did.
Debbie doesn't use styrofoam models or freehand sketches in her design process.
I use Photoshop. I am not trained in AutoCAD. Probably should have been 14 years ago, but it seems to work. I go through many PowerPoints. This year, actually, there was 14, just with changes and ideas and little tweaks here and there and suggestions, which you have to be willing to listen to suggestions. That's part of the design, but to still kind of make it your own. The First Lady makes the final decision. I put together designs, and they get passed on to the National Parks Foundation and the Park Service because they oversee the national tree. They pick and choose or get back to me about, we talk about weights and so forth, and then it gets passed on to the First Lady to make the final decision. It's usually narrowed down a little bit, though. She doesn't have to go through the 14 PowerPoints.
On the morning of February 19, 2011, a strong wind gust brought down the Colorado blue spruce that served as the national Christmas tree for 32 years. A replacement was planted the following October, but only lasted for one season due to transplant shock. Out of concern for the health of the new tree planted in 2012, the Park Service began to enforce restrictions on the type of decorations used. Due to their size and weight, custom-made ornaments were discontinued, and light strings could no longer be hung directly on the tree's branches.
We would have to basically build a harness, cable harness that would go around the tree. So we would have to put the lights on that because technically, we were not supposed to touch the tree. We had to put a harness around there and the net lights around the harness. It kind of, gave it more of a cone type look to it.
When you think about the Nela Park display, that's several blocks of holiday lighting displays. And there could be close to 1 million lights in this Nela Park display. And then you look at the national tree and you think, this is one tree. I mean, that should be a lot easier. Well, It wasn't, and it's not, because of the constraints. I mean, and all the people you have to keep happy. With you got the National Park Service, you got the White House, you got Hargrove, who's actually going to do the installation. Oh, by the way, we don't want to hang lights directly on the tree because this is a living tree. So it's complicated. It's much more complicated than you think it would be.
The Park Service also wants to make sure that you're not putting on so many lights that it's becoming a burden to the tree if you were to get snow or ice or heavy winds and a combination of that up there. So it's a fine dance of being able to put the amount of lights on the tree that really need to be on there, but still keep in mind the safety and security of the tree.
How does a designer deal with all of these stipulations?
To be creative, to be open to suggestions and criticism, but to still make that tree your own. Even after somebody's told you, this is how we want it, you can give it a little bit of a tweak that makes it you.
Debbie's design of the 2018 tree was, let's just say, put to the test.
We call him the tree climber. He decided that he was going to climb the tree, and he got inside the netting of the tree and started climbing it, and Secret Service had to cut the nets to get in there to get him out of there. And then we tried to turn the tree back on or fix it, and there was a government shutdown. So it was a little challenging.
I actually saw it on TV first. And as I'm watching it on TV, I get the phone calls start rolling in. So at that point in time, I realized I have to go down there and see what I can do. A lot of the lights had been cut up from the Secret Service getting in there and trying to get to that person. And when it was all said and done, we had a tree that had a gaping hole in it, and many of the lights that didn't work, and the star didn't work. So we were able to go in there and take the lights that we had and do whatever we could from the ground, mind you. I had one of my coworkers there, the skinniest guy we have here, he was climbing up in the tree trying to make connections on some of the branches that we could, just to be able to get the tree to light up enough so it could still look like a Christmas tree and not like something that had been damaged.
Earl Hargrove officially retired in 2008, and the Hargrove Company was acquired by Encore Global in 2018. Through all the transition, there's still a Hargrove family connection to the National Christmas Tree.
Chris Wellen, one of my very favorite people. I remember when he first came on board, he is the stepson of my cousin, Stephen Fauché, who is still very, very active in the company. So he kind of came on board and started working on the Christmas tree, and just became such a favorite employee. He was just fun, vivacious. Everybody liked him. And to see him grow in this company over the years and now be the one who's responsible for how many years decorating this tree, it's still in the family. He's still one of our relatives, and I think that's pretty special.
Out of all the trees Chris installed, he does have a favorite.
My favorite Christmas tree was 2014. The decorations on that really kind of encompass everything that is Christmas. You have your red ribbon, your green lights, you have your white stars for decorations, and the ability for us to be able to pull that off with that ribbon and making it look symmetrical around that tree, and the challenges that went in with that really make that my favorite tree.
Savant Systems acquired GE Lighting in July of 2020. Along with the acquisition came the responsibility of lighting and designing the national tree. Even with the change in ownership, Debbie's role as the tree's designer continues. With the COVID restrictions of 2020, an in-person tree lighting ceremony was not possible. The online-only ceremony included the president giving his Christmas message and flipping the switch, followed by pre-recorded performances from various musical guests.
We had planned a red, white, and blue patriotic theme that year, and then we found out that we really weren't going to do much on the tree. We were going to kind of keep it simple, but the fact that we were patriotic in a year that things were in chaos, I think it really helped.
After suffering damage from both a windstorm and the 2018 climber, the tree was replaced with another blue spruce in 2019. That tree only lasted 2 seasons, and a white fir was planted in the fall of 2021.
It was a real big thing because the new tree came in, and it couldn't get planted until October because if you put it in the summer, it's too hot, and then it needs a resting time. So that whole time frame for when it got planted, the 2-week resting period, it completely eliminated our installation window. And there was a real panic mode because we found this out in, I think, late September, I want to say, maybe early October, which basically means not only did we have limited planning time, but there was going to be the issue of not being able to do the typical cone we do and we've been doing over the last 10 years plus. Or it was we go to direct decorate. And no one was looking to do that. That wasn't supposed to be the plan. It was just decided at that point and due to the time frame that we're going to do it. So it's kind of like a full circle in a way, where we used to do it that way decades ago. We went to a different method, and now because of last year how it played out, we're back to doing it how it's traditionally done, how Mr. Hargrove has always done it when he did it.
Does Debbie have a favorite tree?
I do. Probably the 28 tree, which was a green tree with red ribbons and red twinkling spheres. I also like the 2015 tree, which was a white twinkle tree with gold ribboning and Bethlehem stars. Those are probably 2 of my favorites.
Out of all the GE designers, Debbie George was given the honor of designing one of the most significant national Christmas trees, the 100th tree.
It's an elegant celebration. It's the 100 years of the national tree. When I think of elegant celebrations, I think of golds and whites and twinkles and crystals and diamonds and things like that. So yes, it's going to be white lights and white twinkling spheres and Bethlehem stars and a little bit of gold lights just to enhance, and we're going to have some holographic gold spinners, we call them. They're just on for daytime interest, but they'll be in diamond shapes. We are pulling out a bunch of the old tree toppers from the past that we still have, and we're updating them with all LED light sources inside, and those will be all around the base of the tree, and it'll show some of the history.
With 14 national Christmas trees to her credit, including the 100th tree, Debbie reflects on her experience.
It's honestly the fact that it's an honor that I can still do this job, that GE is still donating all the lights, me, the installers. It's an honor. And when last year, when the tree lighting was actually on national TV, and LL Cool J introduced the tree as America's tree, America's most famous tree, it was like, oh my gosh, we get to do that.
Since 1923, 17 presidents with differing political ideologies have all agreed on the importance of the annual tradition of the national Christmas tree. The tree was a beacon of hope and unity in some of our nation's darkest times. As we embarked on a world war, mourned the loss of a beloved president, it became a poignant reminder of our citizens held hostage in a foreign land. And it was lit again when they returned home. It was a symbol of hope and freedom as the Cold War was ending and relations with the Soviet Union were warming up. When war was brought to our shores, it was a blaze in our nation's colors to strengthen our resolve to prevail. Even a global pandemic couldn't mask its light. No matter what the next 100 years holds for our republic, may our national Christmas tree continue to be an annual beacon of hope and unity.